Well, hello, this is Jeff Gaudiosi, and you're on misplacedstraws.com, where music comes to life. And my guest today has been one of the most in-demand drummers in rock for nearly 4 decades now. He's probably best known for his time with Alice Cooper and GTR, but he's played with many, many others. He's now started an all-star prog tribute band called Progject, and he's here to talk about it. Please welcome Jonathan Mover. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you. Good to be here. How much do I owe you for that intro? That was very nice.
I'll send the bill to the agency.
Okay. Yes, please do. I paid them enough.
So let's start with Progject. First of all, who joined you in the band? Because you have an all-star cast around you. And how'd you guys all come together?
Well, it came together really in two different ways, or with two different kind of, inputs, you might say. One is, prog rock is my first and biggest love. It's the reason why I play drums, most definitely because of ELP being my first real big influence and favorite band when I was a kid, after hearing Lucky Man on the radio and then discovering the record cover of Brain Salad Surgery and hearing Carnival 9, that was it. So I've always loved prog rock because after ELP, of course, I got into Yes and Genesis and Crimson and UK, Gentle Giant, and it was really probably the biggest musical input I had in my formative years. So it was pretty important to me. I always wanted to play it because it's the most fun, but by the time I ended up turning pro in my late teens, although I did play with a couple of prog associated bands, you might say, prog was really kind of over in the classic prog sense of the 70s. Genesis, of course, went on to do great things still. And of course, Yes came back and reinvented themselves with Trevor Rabin and horn. But, GTR was, to me, kind of a pop rock band that was sprinkled with a little bit of prog dust, if you know what I mean. And I had a little dabble with Marillion, which was the same thing. They really weren't playing the type of prog that I grew up listening to. So it was always, in my DNA, you might say, but I went on to have a wonderful career with a lot of great artists, some of which you just mentioned, but nothing to do with prog, really. So no complaints, all good. But the year before COVID, I got a last minute rescue call, which I get a lot, on tours and records, being a freelance guy. And it was from the tribute band called The Musical Box. So I didn't know that much about them, but, heard that they were a tribute band to Genesis. And I had literally just flown back from Massachusetts that morning. It was a Tuesday, and I was on the East Coast visiting my mother. Brutally cold there in February, and happy to be back in LA.
I'm in Connecticut, so I get it.
Right? I was up in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. So very happy to be home in the sun, and got a text message and then a phone call, and I was speaking to the bass player. I'm sorry to say, I'm forgetting his name. Oh boy. Forgive me. Anyway, the bassist, who kind of is the guy that leads the band, and he said, French Canadian, and with his great accent, we're very excited to play with you. We've all seen you play with other people, and this will be an honor. And I said, my pleasure. I love Genesis and grew up playing it. So, here's my email address. Shoot me your set list and your dates, and we'll figure it out. And then he very matter-of-factly said, tomorrow is the first date, and it's in New Hampshire, where I just literally flown 6 hours back this morning. So I hopped on a flight the next morning and just showed up and started playing with them, and it literally just catapulted me right back to being 15 years old in the basement of my parents' house with headphones on and the phonograph behind me, and playing to Seconds Out, start to finish, and Lamb, and everything. It was just amazing. It was a wonderful feeling because, I've always enjoyed everybody I've played with, but it's not that often that I've, played with somebody that I really had some type of a childhood attachment to. Aretha, I certainly did. You know, I mean, I grew up listening to her and never dreamed I would get that gig. And for almost 5 years of playing with her, I had to pinch myself many times. And Alice also was a blast to play with because I was a big Cooper fan too, and saw him quite a few times in concert when I was a kid. But nothing rings true like prog does. So even though I wasn't playing with Genesis, I was playing Genesis with the closest thing to Genesis in front of an audience every night of rabid Genesis fans that were eating it up. And it just made me realize that there's a market out there for a Genesis audience, a Yes audience, a Rush audience, a Crimson, you know, all of these tribute bands are out there playing. And so when I got back to LA after playing with Musical Box for a little bit and the gig was over, I was, you know, to be honest with you, I was really bummed out. I hadn't had that much fun in a long time, and it struck a chord, no pun intended. And so I literally said, how can I do this for myself? You know, but I don't want to do a tribute band because that, first of all, is in a box. And it's also, you know, what the Musical Box, again, no pun intended, what they do is really great, just like Brit Pink Floyd and, you know, some of the other bands that are out there that are doing wonderful tributes to the people. But they play their music and they emulate their show and they play their music note for note. I didn't want to do that. And I also wanted to pay tribute, again, to so many different artists that, you know, were influential to me and inspirational to me. So I thought more of an homage band, you know, to the genre of prog, but the classic prog of the very late 60s and 70s. And maybe we'll touch a little bit in the 80s, but still focusing on the four main bands of Genesis, Yes, Crimson, and ELP, and then branch out and do some Floyd and some Rush, some Gentle Giant, some Tull, Peter Gabriel, maybe some Todd Rundgren and stuff like that, the Tubes, you know, people that are also prog, but maybe not as well known. So that kind of is the long-winded answer to your first question. How I came up with them is really, it's too good to be true. And it literally happened just like this. It was a Friday afternoon and I was back maybe a few days or a week. I had already gone onto the computer and mapped out in text and spreadsheets my whole concept of Progject. What instrumentation I would like, the type of people, what songs I would want to play from what bands, what direction to go in. And a very good friend of mine who's a guitar player out here named Eric Madsen, who I played with, and he's also much more a part of the LA scene than I am because I had just moved out here a few years ago. So even though I've done, you know, 50 records in LA, I don't know the community. You know, I would fly in and do a session and leave. So I said to Eric, you know, I've got this idea and we're in Pasadena having a dinner before going to see Brand X on a Friday evening. And this is important. So I'm telling him at dinner, you know, I've got this idea. And do you know anybody? And the first guy, he says, you know, I just did a gig a couple of weeks ago with this amazing keyboard player named Rio Okumoto, who I didn't know who he was. And he said he plays with Spock's Beard, who I knew a little bit about. And I said, okay, this sounds good. So he literally at the table, dinner table, he sends Rio a text. Jonathan Mover's got this idea for a band. You know, should I give him your number? Rio texts back immediately, give him my number. I'm very interested. So all good. We finished dinner. And the reason we're in Pasadena is to go next door to see Brand X. And as we get into line, who's standing in front of us? Rio. It was just crazy. So, you know, he turns around, we meet for the first time. We talked for about 10 or 15 minutes. It was a done deal. We both wanted to do this. In talking to Eric, you know, continuing my talks, he said, what about Mike Keneally on guitar? And Eric and I had just seen Mike with Satriani, you know, maybe 6 months or a year before here in LA. I went to see Joe. And so I said, oh, you know, Mike's busy with Joe. He's doing much bigger things. I'm sure he would be interested. So we went down, you know, a list. Anyway, a few days later, I was on my way back to Boston. And while I was there, I was going to be interviewed by I hope I get his last name right, Alan Balageron from New Ear's prog music. He's got a podcast about prog. So when I did the interview with him, we talked all about the musical box and GTR and Mike Oldfield and anybody that I've been with. And when we were done, I said, I've got this new idea. I got to tell you about it. And he loved the concept. And I said, do you happen to know a singer and or a bass player that's prog associated and affiliated? And he said, well, Matt Dorsey, who I didn't know, is a bass player, multi-instrumentalist. He's into prog. He's playing with Phil Collins' son Simon in a band. He lives in LA. Here's his number. What about Michael Sadler? I said, he's not going to want to do this. He's got like Keneally. He's got Saga, he's a big rock star. So anyway, I got back to LA. I called Matt and he was down almost immediately, actually immediately. And then Alan called me and said, I spoke to Michael. He's into it. Give him a call. So the four of us came together quite, quickly. And then, it was like, who are we going to get on guitar? And so we started playing with a few guys here in LA, very good players, but nobody was really the right fit. And this is right before COVID hit. So I called my friend Jason Beeler, who is the guitar player and writer and
great guy too.
Great guy, amazing guitar player. And I called him up because we played together for many years. And I said, look, I'm doing this thing. I don't know if it's in your wheelhouse, but I think you're the guy to fit this thing. And I told him all about it. And of course, he said, I've heard of these guys, but I don't know any of their music, but any chance to play with you, let me listen to the stuff, send it to me, which I did. And then he basically got back to me and he said, I'd love to come in and do it. I don't know if I'm the right guy for the permanent thing, but, I'll give it a shot. And he knocked it out of the park. I mean, he really practiced, playing in every odd time signature he didn't even know existed. And he came out to LA and we just started moving forward, knowing that it wasn't going to be permanent with him, but it didn't stop us. We did the videos, we did audio, rehearsed a bunch, we launched the website. And then, he basically said, I'm open to start touring and just, let's see how it goes. But the band really took off, I think, much quicker than he or anybody expected. We thought maybe we'd get a couple of weeks of shows put together, and now we've got 22 dates in a month on a tour bus and everything. So he just said, look, I'm in there with you, but if you can find the right guy, you might as well try to do it now because you guys are going to be very busy. And I'm doing another record and I've got my stuff going on. So just for hell of it, I called up Keneally. I had the list with some other guys. We played some people, but I did finally connect with Mike. And I sent him the link to the website and some of the videos. And he called me the next day and he said, I want to play with you guys. I want to do this. So it was literally kind of that simple.
Nice.
Or that easy, I should say. It really came together magically.
Well, and again, you're picking bands that all of these guys grew up listening to, and everyone, your favorite music is always the music you grew up with.
Right.
So I think for these guys, getting a chance to go out and play that on stage for fans is a big deal. It kind of gets them out of their own element of, the bands they're most known for.
Right. Yeah. Yep. I couldn't agree with you more. We all feel the same way. And, we're just having a blast when we get together and rehearse. It's just too much fun, and it's really getting better and better every week. And we're nitpicking and morphing a few things and changing a couple things here and there that are making it even more interesting without losing the respect and appreciation for the original. But man, when we get in front of an audience, forget it. We're dying to play. And I don't think people are going to know what they're in for, because the video clips that we've released are quite contained. They're 20 seconds, 40 seconds. There are a couple of little bits that show our elements in it, but it's nothing compared to the show that we have ready to play.
And now you talked about where you're concentrating in terms of the music that the band is playing. Now, all of you guys on your own have been on some pretty classic recordings, especially in the prog genre. Do you see any of your own music of the band getting in there, or are you just kind of sticking to that early prog period?
Yeah, not at the moment. And there's a couple of reasons why. we want to pay homage, however you want to say it. Everybody says it different. To the people that influenced us and got us going, that we dreamed of being like, you know. And there's a big difference between looking at Genesis or Yes or Crimson that way, as opposed to looking at Asia or, you know, GTR or Saga. So we are really sticking to the I don't want to say the formula, but more of the groundwork that was set for us, that we're now, you know, enjoying. But, you know, it's not to say that we might not dabble with something here or there as we go down the road. It's a little, and maybe I'm wrong, you know, because, well, let me finish what I was going to say. It's a little strange thinking about us playing a Saga tune when Saga is still playing, you know, or us playing a Marillion tune that I co-wrote or something with them 30 plus years ago, when they're still a band playing, which is a little bit different. Even though Yes is still playing, it's very different, you know, if you know what I mean. So for now, we're sticking to, you know, the giants and our favorites, with some, you know, fun stuff, secrets thrown in there. But you never know what's going to happen.
And now the tour is through most of April. You're playing quite a bit up here in the Northeast, so I'll definitely be catching the band then. But have you guys actually been able to play in front of an audience yet with the pandemic, or is this going to be
you know,
first?
Even before we got Mike, when we were first playing with Jason, we were looking at dates a year and a half ago. So we were starting to map out. We had some shows booked, which I think was in September, October of 2020. Yeah, 2 years ago almost. That got canceled and pushed back and put on hold to spring of 21. And then that got pushed back, offered to fall of 21. And we just said no, because at that point it was just too up in the air. And we said, we'll just wait and see what happens. So no, we have not played for anybody but ourselves, not even wives and girlfriends. So we're ready to go. And it's we've got 22 shows starting April 1st out here in Los Angeles at my facility, which is an event facility. I've got a bunch of sound stages and film stages and a big production company. So we've hosted a bunch of people before. We're going to do an event in my place, and then we jump on the bus and we head to the Midwest, and then we pick it up April 6th, and we finish May 1st, which is the pre-cruise party for the Cruise to the Edge. And then we go out again the beginning of August on the West Coast for a couple of weeks. We take a little break, and then we're back out for a longer one, which is going to be 5 to 6 weeks, the end of August through the second week or so of October. And we're going to try to cover most of the States and a little bit of Canada at that time. We very happily got offered a couple of options and opportunities to go overseas to the UK and Europe. But we chose not to, you know, take a chance on that this year, just because it's ever changing. And the last thing we want to do is either have something cancel and or go somewhere and then, you know, be stuck. Whereas if we're stuck in the States, and I don't think we will be, we can always just drive home.
Right.
Yeah. But next year we will definitely go international and conquer the world. But we couldn't even book Canada in April because at the time, a few months ago, the borders were still closed. Just starting to open up now, but we'll hit a bit of Canada in the fall tour that we do then.
And just kind of looking back, you mentioned some of your history a bit, and you know, when I first heard your name, you know, as a prog loving kid with my all-time favorite band Marillion, and you know, your stint with them just before the Fugazi record, and just how did that come about, and why didn't it work for you in that situation?
Well, I can easily answer how it came about, and then I'll think a little bit about why it didn't work out, where I can be diplomatic. It came about, it's really actually very funny how it came about. So I took a trip to London after high school. You know, I checked out Berklee College of Music for a minute, and even entertained the idea of coming out to LA to look into PIT, Percussion Institute. And I just made a deal with my parents, and I said, you know, if I'm going to do like 4 years of school, I would rather take 4 years to try to play and make it professionally. And if I don't make it, I'll go to school at 22, but 18 to 22, I want to get out there. So I just jumped on a plane and went to London with a 6-month open round trip ticket, mostly because English prog rock was my favorite. And any musicians that I could see possibly playing with were more than likely going to be there than they were in the States. So I just went over and I started hanging out. I ended up getting an audition for who is now Robert Fripp's wife, Toya Wilcox. And she had a punk band back then, but it was a really slick punk band because they had just played for a couple of years with Simon Phillips, who was one of my favorite drummers, and he really kicked the shit out of them. So they were kind of a sloppy punk band until they hired him, and then all of a sudden they grew up quick. So I got the Toya records he played on, and I loved the material. So when I got to London, I called and I got an audition with them. Very quick story is, I got a call from her manager the next day and said, I have good news and bad news. The good news is they loved your playing. The bad news is Toya just got offered a movie with Sir Laurence Olivier, so she's taking a year off. So keep in touch and we'll see you next year. Anyway, I hung around London for a bit. And then after, a few months, I did some gigs and met some people, and I really liked it. And I had in mind that I was going to move there. So I went back home to the East Coast, to Boston. And while I was there, I got the call from Marillion's manager at the time. I don't know if he still is, a guy named John Arneson. And so, and here's the funny story. Well, the reason they called me was Nick Tauber, the engineer and maybe later on producer of Marillion, was the engineer of Toya. So he happened to be talking to the Toya camp one day and said, I'm producing Marillion. They're having drummer problems and can't find anybody. And the bass player in Toya, Phil Spalding, who later became GTR's bass player, was kind enough to say, we played with this young American kid who's a prog nut, and plays all the odd time and Simon Phillips type of player, give him a call. So here's the funny story. When I was in London, there used to be these record stores called Our Price. And so I went walking into Our Price one day and I said to the guy behind the counter, I'm from America and I'm here, drummer, and I love prog rock. Here are my favorites. Is there anything you guys would have here that I might not know about that you can turn me on to? And so he gave me Script for a Jester's Tear and 2 EPs. One of them had Grendel on it. And I don't remember, maybe Market Square Heroes or something, the other one. Yeah. So of course I didn't have a phonograph with me and I was in London. So I just put them, next to my suitcase. And a couple months later, when I went back home, I put them on the turntable and I dropped the needle on Script. I don't remember the first song, but maybe it's Script for Just a Tear. And I have to be honest with you, I hated it. And the reason I hated it was the original drummer was really not a good drummer, and it was hard for me to listen to it because of the uneasy rhythm and groove. And I also have to admit, I didn't take to Fish's voice right away either. I found them to be basically kind of a Genesis wannabe. So I then put on the Grendel EP, and I remember dropping the needle in a couple of places, and I absolutely heard Apocalypse in 9/8, but it was like in 8/8. Dun, 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 dun. And they just basically ripped off Genesis, and not in a good way. So I said, these guys are terrible, and I didn't play them again. Anyway, like a month or two later, I get the phone call from John Arneson, very nice. And he told me why they were calling. And I said, I've got the Marillion records. I love you guys. I'd love to audition. Absolutely, I mean, hey, it's a pro gig. So they were coming to New York to open up for Rush for like 4 or 5 dates at Radio City. And they invited me to the gig. So I came down and I went to most of the shows. And it was very interesting what happened. They were booed off the stage every night. The Rush audience just did not buy Fish. They didn't like the grease paint and they didn't like his theatrics. But they had a drummer playing with them named John Martyr was his name. And he was a very good drummer. And what was really interesting was I liked the music when I heard it played with a good drummer. The band, that first record would be a whole different ball game if somebody like Martyr had played on it. So I was really glad I went. And I met the band afterwards, and we hung out at the hotel, and they said, we'd love you to come over and audition. And I said, great, because I'm going to move back there anyway. So I flew back, you know, a couple of weeks later or a few weeks later. And they were auditioning, if I remember correctly. I've got diaries of everything, but I haven't read them for a while. I believe they were auditioning on a Tuesday and a Wednesday. So I showed up on Tuesday to say hello and tell everybody I was there. And they said, oh, you know, you're going to play tomorrow at like 11 in the morning for an hour. I said, okay. And I stuck around and I listened to some of the people that were coming and going. And nobody was playing any song for more than like 30 seconds to a minute. They couldn't even play simple 7/8 or 9 or something. These drummers just were not ready to play with them. So I split. I came back the next day, and I was the first or second guy to go in, and we played 1 or 2 songs complete. And then they threw something at me that they were now writing, and I played it down. And they said, you know, thank you very much. You know, we'll let you know. Come back, you know, later. And I walked out with my tail between my legs. And I said, I don't understand. All these guys yesterday couldn't play and they got an hour. You know, I just played the stuff and they're done with me. Well, you know, fortunately, I found out that they didn't need to hear any more. So when I came back later that day, they, you know, wonderfully told me that I had the gig, and could I go with them to Germany the next day and do a live record that turned into a live radio broadcast that turned into a record. And so that was it. I hopped on a plane with them to Germany, and we played a record that came out that has the title of a cucumber in it or something. I don't remember it. And then when we got back to London, all was wonderful. I was, you know, I was very excited. I called home and said, hey, I made it, you know, we just played in Germany, and my road to rock star fame is, you know, and fortune is paved. So, and, you know, one thing led to another, and Fish just chose not to get along with me for reasons that I don't want to say. He knows why, and the guys know why. And Fish and I had a blowout one night because he just, you know, went a little bit too far. And Fish is a monster, you know, what is he, 6'6" or something, and weighs 280. And, you know, I'm 150 when I'm wet. And, you know, I was almost going after him. The guys had to break us up. And so the next morning, yeah, Fish gave the band an ultimatum and said, it's either him or me. And obviously they chose him. He was the lead singer of the band. And I just said to the guys, this is going to come back and bite you one day. I totally get it. But you're making a mistake, because if you let him get away with this now, he's going to rule you guys forever. And I split. So it was a difficult thing to go through, but it was a great thing to go through in respect to learning lessons, you know, that young, that didn't deter me. They just made me even hungrier. And again, in my own way, I have Fish to thank for part of my career, Phil Spalding for part of it, you know, introducing me. Had I stayed with Marillion, I'm sure I would have had a nice little life in England and everything, but, you know, I wouldn't have done a tenth of what I've done. And I'll finish the story by saying, Ian Mosley was one of the drummers who was also considered when I was being, you know, considered when we were auditioning. And so maybe a month later or something, I found out that Ian had now gotten the gig after I was gone. So I just said, oh, well, that's a simple math equation. Ian is now with Marillion. Ian was with Steve Hackett, who's with Steve Hackett. So I got Steve Hackett's manager's phone number. I'm not remembering his name. I'm not a very nice guy. And I called him up and I said, hey, my name is, Jonathan Mover. I'm a drummer from Boston. I'm here in London. I just finished a Marillion gig. I heard that Ian's with Marillion. Is Steve looking for a drummer? And he said to me, oh, you're a day late. Steve was just auditioning for the last 2 or 3 weeks and he found somebody. But thank you very much. And I said, okay, appreciate it. Goodbye. Hung up the phone. So I called him back about 2 minutes later. And I said, I'm sorry to bother you, but would you relay a message to Steve? I said, could you please tell him to give me an hour in a rehearsal room? And if I get the gig, he can pay for the rehearsal room. And if I don't get the gig, I'll pay for it. And I hung up. And he called me back about 10 minutes later. And he said, Steve Hackett says you have big balls. And I met him at a rehearsal space the next day or a couple of days later, and we played for literally about 2 minutes. A couple of tunes on the Highly Strung record, which were Crazy Odd Time in like 13, 16 or something. And Steve just said, the gig is yours. And the end of this is about, so I went to Steve Hackett's, I got the gig, I called home to mom and dad, I did it again. And Steve invited me to his holiday party. And at his holiday party was Chester Thompson, who of course I was crazy about. And then Tony Banks walks in, who, I would want to talk to him about playing with Steve Gadd and everything. So he was, entertaining me because I was a fan. And then Mike Rutherford walked in and I almost fainted because Small Creeps Day, I think I own 5 or 6 of those in vinyl. It's one of the greatest prog masterpieces ever with Simon on drums. So here I am at Steve Hackett's, surrounded by, most of Genesis. Phil didn't show up. And I can't believe what's going on. And then, 2 or 3 days later, we're supposed to start rehearsals for the European tour. That's what I was hired for. And so my phone rings and Hackett calls me up and he says, I have good news and bad news, just like Toya's manager a year before. And I said, okay, give me the bad news first. And he said, well, there's no more band and there's no more tour. I said, okay, give me the good news. I just had lunch with Steve Howe and we're going to do a new guitar-based supergroup and we want you to be the drummer. So thank you, Fish.
It didn't work out too bad for you.
Yeah, no complaints. And I've seen Fish since. We buried our hatchet and had a laugh a couple of times. And I haven't seen the guys from Marillion in a long time. I did go to see them when Ian was in the band to say hi. But Fish, I think, was already gone, and the guy that replaced him was in. And but then I saw Fish. And we've spoken a couple of times, so all good. No animosity, no bad feelings. No, it's all fine.
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of interviewing Steve Hackett many times. He's just one of my favorite people in this business.
He's a sweetheart.
Such a great guy.
Yeah, he's in a business of very disingenuous people. He's extremely genuine.
Yeah,
he really is.
He is. Well, we've been spending some time here with Jonathan Mover. The band is called Progject. They're hitting the road throughout most of the country in April. And as he said, we'll have more tour dates coming up at the end of the summer. You guys have the website online that has all your tour dates and everything. I know you'll be up here in the Northeast, so we'll definitely check you out. Yep. And Jonathan, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. It's been a pleasure talking to you. We will definitely do it again because we have so much more to talk about. We could be here all day.
The pleasure. It's been great. I appreciate your interest and support, and do let us know when you're coming out to one of the shows so we can meet up in person.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.